Hello everyone, I'm Ricelli Laplace and I'm a PhD fellow at Aarhus School of Architecture.
And I'm Joel Letkemann, also a PhD student at the Aarhus School of Architecture.
And in this presentation, we will talk about the paper that we wrote together for this conference, called Science Fiction in Participatory Design. Our paper describes a workshop in participatory design within architectural education that we did together doing our PhDs. The workshop was based on two methodologies from our respective research, called Responsible Architecture and Science Fictioning.
In the first part of this presentation, we unfold these two theoretical frameworks. Then we talk about the methods we used within the workshop and to collect and analyze our data. Then we will explore the experiment and the specific pedagogical methods that we developed combining these methods. We describe these methods under the headings of authorship, storytelling, and translation, and correlate them to the three phases of the project. Then we conclude with the implications for participatory design processes in education and future possibilities for research.
Regarding the theoretical frameworks, the first one is Responsible Architecture, or RA. It's a methodology based on value-led participatory learning experiments to define ecological values and methods and their implications to inspire sustainable behavior in design. In contrast with the notion that people's decision-making and behavior are based on facts, knowledge, and reasoning, research has shown that they are actually highly impacted by emotions, identity, and values. In order to move towards a sustainable future, there is a need for a cultural transition in the worldview of individuals and institutions, rather than for mere technological fixes, which is usually the focus in sustainable architecture. Therefore, responsible architecture stages the design processes by inviting participants to co-create shared values with the goal to engage with people's current value system to enable personal and cultural transition towards an ecological worldview. Our values, worldviews, and behaviors are interlinked and influencing each other. Therefore, a change in people's worldviews means a change in values and can impact behavior. In this scenario, participatory design can offer ideal conditions for the co-creation of shared values and problem solving, and to encourage participants to be a collective of action-taking individuals, to put into practice their responsibilities and abilities to respond to local ecological issues. Value-led participatory design processes can have material outcomes as the design product, but also immaterial outcomes, helping transforming the participants' ways of thinking.
Science fictioning explores speculative potentials within architectural design and pedagogy. It shares affinities with long-standing speculative practices in architectural design and also practices such as design fiction and speculative design, which make more explicit reference to science fiction. While each of these explores the benefit of speculative storytelling for design, none of them develops far beyond a popular understanding of science fiction and its contribution to design thinking. Rather than the certainty of a singular future imagined as an extended present, science fiction is a tool to explore multiple futures. Expecting that the future will unfold according to present-day knowledge puts limits on what can be imagined, what Frederick Jameson calls a project to colonize the future from the perspective of the present. However, building upon the science fiction practice of world building, Donna Haraway reminds us that the project of imagining the world is a project of changing the way we think about the world, and of sharing that with one another. The practice of storytelling is a chance to test these futures together and to understand how they might generate the potential for worldly practices in the present. The question of storytelling is also a question of authorship. Part of being a storyteller is knowing one's authorial voice, that it comes from a unique, situated perspective, and knowing which other voices to include in the future. Science fictioning asks all present and future architects to become active and conscientious storytellers, alone and with others, fully aware that, in Donna Haraway's invocation, stories make worlds.
In this paper, we describe a 2-week participatory design workshop for second-year architecture students called Materializing Collective Futures. This workshop is one of several happening between 2020 and 2023 as part of a long-term participatory design collaboration between our school and a local community called Institute for X. In this workshop, students work with stakeholders from this community in a contested and rapidly gentrifying site in Aarhus, Denmark, where the school is also situated. The participatory process starts from participants imagining a 50-year horizon for their shared future, using this to frame their hopes and ambitions for the community, and working backwards to develop community initiatives that work towards that future.
The workshop was organized into 3 phases: aligning futures, worlding futures, and building futures. Each phase had a duration of 3 to 4 days, and the 3 methods described in the following sections roughly correspond to each phase: authorship, storytelling, and translation. We also share specific exercises in each phase, which we have found beneficial both as pedagogical tools and within the processes of participatory design. In order to understand the efficacy of our proposed methods, we collected data including students' production, a reflection logbook, conversation with participants, and observation of student-stakeholder interactions. We also observed and took notes from several meeting sessions between students and stakeholders and complemented this data with individual conversations with participants.
In the first phase, aligning futures, students explored authorship and the many authors, human and non-human, that can produce a work of design, as well as power dynamics in decision making. From the personal intrinsic values of each participant, we stage conversations with stakeholders in which we ask them to find shared values as the starting point of their participatory process. These exercises allowed people to be explicit about their values and worldviews and articulate common values as their baseline for collaboration. Students' first task was for them to articulate the values that inform their individual personal and professional lives, as later share their values with their peers. This exercise helps students to identify for themselves where they can activate their values and have an impact on the world, both as individuals and as professionals, and how architectural practice can emerge from personal values and not only from disciplinary norms. After that, we asked them to express their values in relation to peers in their work group. And after sharing their values with one another, they should then develop a common identity by naming their group. This self-naming exercise was important in establishing identity, but also in negotiating how one's individual values intersect with other people's values. Later, we asked each group to do the same with their stakeholders. As a first step, students and stakeholders shared their values as a way to help the negotiation process and understand other stakeholders' values and motivations. The stakeholders participated in various ways: formal presentations, shared and one-on-one discussions, and informal conversations and visits on site. Students were also encouraged to think of themselves as stakeholders and active in the collective future of their school surroundings, speaking both for themselves and for the future generations of students. From an analysis of their self-reported logbooks, we believe that this exercise helps students in understanding their own motivation and agency in the project and increase their engagement in the process. It helped to reveal the often unconscious process through which one's own values are connected to one's design practice, and how this might be productive in one's professional life. Finally, we observed that these exercises enhance students' individual responsibility and desire to respond holistically to issues in the project, and to develop empathy and awareness of how others are implicated in the design process.
In the second phase, Worlding Futures, students worked with other stakeholders in proposing future visions with the ecology of actors on the site. These were captured in what we called the Article of Hope, a utopian document which reflects stakeholders' worldviews and collects their hopes for the community. This Article of Hope exercise developed a vision of the site as it could be in 50 years' time, relying on modes of expression that are explicitly science fictional, and like other works in that genre, makes a future become visible and thinkable to others. The Article of Hope is produced by students over several iterations, in dialogue with other stakeholders, as a way to share hopes for the future, but also to probe the potential consequences of the world implied by each suggestion. It is a way for stakeholders to communicate their long-term hopes and aspirations for the site, acting as a guide to future action and decision-making. However, with the intention of open-ended design, it is always aware that utopia is an ongoing practice, not a declaration of finality. The attention to futures meant that each stakeholder's immediate needs and demands were subordinated to farther-ranging hopes for the future that were imagined together. These hopes became the basis for continued conversation and collaboration between stakeholders. The unique possibilities of speculative storytelling are a way to include actors who would otherwise not necessarily be represented. from the silent voice of non-human ecologies on site to actors on a global scale, such as the specter of climate change. In the final phase, Materializing Futures, we asked students to suggest a first step towards the environment implied in the Article of Hope, describing the material consequences of the values and hopes developed in the previous phases. However, recognizing that no work of architecture is ever finished, we encourage students to consider maintaining openness and contingency in the project, leaving space for the continued development as futures are imagined and reimagined together by the community.
Finally, the course closed with an exercise we called Value Action Design Response. Based on the idea from Homer and Cale's cognitive hierarchy model, where cognitions are organized ranging from more abstract cognitions like values to mid-range cognitions like attitudes, and eventually to specific behaviors. So this exercise aimed in helping the translation of conceptual ideas such as values and hopes into concrete design proposals for the site. Here, students divided the work in 3 columns. The first column included the values that emerged from their dialogues with stakeholders in phase 1. Students chose keywords that best represented those values and a short text explaining each keyword's meaning. In the second column, they had to think about the attitudes and actions they wanted their design to promote if they wanted to respond to these values. In this case, the attitudes and actions cultivated within the Articles of Hope in phase 2 was a means to promote this conversation and mutual understanding. In the third column, students began to speculate about how design ideas can respond to each action. Depending on their desired action, the design response could be references, sketches, focusing on concrete responses. The VAR exercise showed to be a valuable guide to design decision making, revealing to students how choices in design could never be innocent, but a response aligned with values and future hopes in architecture. While most students were successful in translating values to design choices aided by this tool, further critical exploration and development of this method is needed in order to facilitate continued stakeholder reflection on materializing conceptual ideas into design choices.
These design proposals were intended to reflect the long-term ambitions of the whole community while remaining open to continued intervention and interpretation. As a result, the choices around material, spaces, and present and future uses all refer back to the values that had first inspired them. As the design developed, so did the Article of Hope, with all stakeholders continuing to develop their aspirations for the community.
In this study, we have noted several beneficial outcomes for participatory design and design pedagogy. We found that staging exercises in order to probe each stakeholder's deeply held values and imaginations for the future developed empathy between actors and provoked shared decision-making, becoming the spark to bridge local and global ecological demands and different worldviews, and translate abstract ideas to the specifics of design. However, these methods are part of an ongoing research, and further study is needed in order to understand the long-term pedagogical effects of the methodologies, especially how it impacted students' future projects and design practice. While we have documented these methodologies in an educational setting, further research could explore how they could impact participatory decision-making in practice. Thank you so much for your attention.